So I recently made a commander deck that included every card like these ones that say you win the game on it. And it turns out that deck is actually super fun to play. So that got me thinking, what if instead of playing every card that says you win the game, I play every card that says you lose the game? There are 23 cards that say you lose the game. They're all right here. There are two other ones that are very similar, but they're not phrased in the exact way, but I have them included anyway. So with these, there are 25. And as you can see, there are 5 colors of cards here, so that means that once again, we need to be playing a 5-color commander. And the commander that we're going with is Kenrith, the Returned King. So this card has several activated abilities, and some of these synergize quite well with some of these lose the game effects. So this is a 5-mana commander. It only costs white, but its color identity is 5 colors. It's a 5/5. Has these activated abilities. You can give all creatures trample and haste till end of turn, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, target player gains 5 life, target player draws a card, or put a creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. And one of the cool things with this deck, as compared to the deck that includes all the win the game cards, is that with the win the game cards, a lot of those are pretty bad cards because winning the game is a pretty great upside. However, with these ones, losing the game is a pretty big downside, but what that means is that the actual effect of the cards tends to be quite good. So in this deck, the individual cards that we're playing are much better. So let's take a closer look at some of these cards now. Also, I should mention that if you'd like to purchase any of the cards you see in this video, you can get those by going to face2facegames.com. They're the largest Magic store in Canada, and they're also a sponsor of the channel. And if you use code 8thplaystave at the checkout, you can save 5% on your order. So the first few cards that say you lose the game is the full cycle of Pacts here. Some of these are pretty popular cards, probably Pact of Negation and Summoner's Pact are ones that you might have seen before, but there is one for every color, and all of them cost 0. They say that you have to pay some mana cost on your next upkeep, otherwise you lose the game. There's Intervention Pact here in white. This one is actually pretty good. The next time a source of your choice will deal damage to you, prevent that damage, you gain life equal to the damage prevented this way. In Commander, sometimes you'll find your opponents trying to one-shot you with something, so this can actually be pretty useful in situations like that. Obviously, Pact of Negation here is great for countering spells. Slaughter Pact can destroy a non-black creature. Pact of the Titan is probably the worst one, I would say. Just makes a 4/4 giant. It does that instant speed, but that's still not that great of an effect in Commander. Then we have Summoner's Pact here, allows us to tutor up a green creature and put it into our hand. So outside of the red one here, these are all pretty strong effects, and we can pay for the mana cost for all of these to make sure we don't lose the game, but if we set up the game properly, we won't have to pay that cost. The next group of cards that says you lose the game are these extra turn cards. There are 6 of these, kind of 5, because Glorious End doesn't give you an extra turn, but it's a very similar effect. So we have Chance for Glory, Alchemist's Gambit, Warrior's Oath, Last Chance, and Final Fortune. These cards all allow you to take an extra turn, but at the end step of that extra turn, you lose the game. And then there's Glorious End here. This just ends the turn, and then at the beginning of your next end step, you lose the game. In a 1-versus-1 match, that is pretty similar to taking an extra turn, but in a 4-player commander game, that's definitely not the same as taking an extra turn, but it's still quite similar to these cards. And these cards are all very good. As I mentioned before, the effects on the cards that say you lose the game tend to be quite good because losing the game is a big drawback. These ones are probably the best ones in the deck though, because taking an extra turn for just something like 2 mana is a very strong thing. Next are these Lich cards that say you lose the game. There's Lich's Mastery, Nefarious Lich, and just straight up Lich. These cards are all similar in that they kind of change the rules of the game for you a little bit, because they say things like, instead of losing life, you exile cards from your graveyard, or instead of gaining life, you draw a card, but they're all a bit different from each other as well. Lich's Mastery here is probably one of the best cards in the deck. This one is a card that says you lose the game, but it is also a card that says you can't lose the game. And cards like this are ways that we can get around the drawback of losing the game on our cards like Final Fortune and whatnot. So this one, it costs 6 mana, it's a legendary enchantment, it has hexproof, it says you can't lose the game. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, for each 1 life you lost, exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or a graveyard, but whenever this leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So with cards like this, you definitely don't want them to leave the battlefield. Now this card in particular is kind of best friends with our commander Kenrith right here, because this says whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. With Kenrith, you can pay 2 and a white to have a player gain 5 life. So you can just keep repeatedly paying 3 mana to gain 5 and draw 5 cards, and use that to go through your deck very quickly to find pretty much anything you need. So there are also these other 2 Lich cards, which are similar, but I would say definitely much worse than Lich's Mastery. There's Nefarious Lich, it costs 4 black, just a regular enchantment, not legendary. If you would be dealt damage, remove that many cards from your graveyard from the game instead. If you can't, you lose the game. If you would gain life, draw that many cards instead, and whenever Nefarious Lich leaves play, you lose the game. And then there's this one all the way back from Alpha. There is just Lich. It's kind of weird that this is an enchantment and not a creature, seeing as a Lich is a type of creature and it looks like a creature. But anyway, once again, it costs 4 black. It's a little bit wordy. You lose all life. If you gain life later in the game, instead draw 1 card from your library for each life. For each point of damage you suffer, you must destroy 1 of your cards in play. Creatures destroyed this way cannot be regenerated. You lose if this enchantment is destroyed, or if you suffer a point of damage without sending a card to the graveyard. So it's kind of the same as Nefarious Lich, just in a much more wordy way. So these cards are very powerful once again, however, we just really want to make sure that they don't leave play, or if they do leave play, we have some kind of effect in play that says we can't lose the game, something like this one. We've got these 3 cards here, which are not Lich cards, but they're kind of similar effects that say you lose the game. There's Immortal Coil, a 4 mana artifact. You can tap it and remove 2 cards from your game to draw a card. If damage would be dealt to you, prevent that damage, remove a card in your graveyard from the game for each 1 damage prevented this way, and when there are no cards in your graveyard, you lose the game. Forbidden Crypt, this is a 5 mana enchantment. For each card you would draw instead, choose a card in your graveyard, put it into your hand. If you can't, you lose the game. Whenever a card is put into your graveyard, remove that card from the game. Out of the Tombs, this is a new card out of the Warhammer Commander decks, a 3 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Eon counters on Out of the Tombs, then mill cards equal to the number of Eon counters on it. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, and instead return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, if you can't, you lose the game. Cards like this are very risky, and typically we don't really want to have them in play unless we can't lose the game. However, with things like this, we can take advantage of their risky nature by giving them to our opponent with some other cards that we'll get to in a moment. Next are 3 creatures that say we lose the game. There's Enduring Angel, has flying and double strike. We have hexproof. If your life would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform Enduring Angel and your life total becomes 3, but if it didn't transform this way, you lose the game. And it just flips over into this star flying. You have hexproof. Its power and toughness are each equal to your life total, and when this attacks, double your life total. There's also this new card here, out of Phyrexia, all will be 1, Archfiend of the Dross. 4 mana 6/6 flying, it enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from it. Then if it has no oil counters on it, you lose the game, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. This is a pretty powerful card, but we're usually not looking to win through just combat damage. We can, definitely, but once again, this card could be quite useful to give to an opponent once it has maybe 1 oil counter left on it. Then there's Phage the Untouchable. This is a very classic card. Costs 7 mana, it's a 4/4. When it comes into play, if you didn't play it from your hand, you lose the game. However, when it deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature can't be regenerated, and when it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So this is also a win condition for us, as well as one of the lose the game cards. Next, there are these 3 enchantments here that say you lose the game that all have their own unique kind of effect. There's Demonic Pact right here. It's a 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Demonic Pact deals 4 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 4 life. Target opponent discards 2 cards, draw 2 cards, or you lose the game. There was actually a standard deck around this when this was in standard, where you would play this, choose 3 modes, and then when only one mode was left to choose, you would use Harmless Offering to give this to your opponent, and then on their upkeep they would lose the game. That's one way that we can win the game with this card right here. There's 9 lives. Fairly new enchantment. It's 1 and 2 white, so 3 mana. It has hexproof. If a source would deal damage to you, prevent that damage and put an incarnation counter on this. When there are 9 or more incarnation counters on it, exile it, and then when this leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. And we have this one, which is quite funny, I think. This is Transcendence, a 6 mana enchantment. You don't lose the game for having 0 or less life, but when you have 20 or more life, you lose the game. So, in Commander, if you play this, you just lose the game, unless you've lost some life before that. Whenever you lose life, you gain 2 life for each 1 life you lost. You can do some fun stuff with this, once again, by giving it to your opponent, because if you have a card in play that says you can't lose the game, something like Lich's Mastery, you can play this, and even if you have 20 or more life, you won't lose. But if your opponent has 20 or more, you can give this to them, and they'll lose. Next, there are these 2 cards here that I mentioned earlier that don't say you lose the game. They're phrased a bit differently, but they can make you lose the game. So there's Triskaidekaphobia. This is one that some people wanted to see included in my all the cards that say you win the game deck, but I didn't include it because it doesn't say you win the game, and also it can make one player lose the game, but that's different from you winning the game, because in a 4-player Commander game, having one person lose doesn't mean you win. However, with this one, if you lose the game, then you still lose the game, so I feel like it's more on theme for this deck. It's a 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one. Each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, then each player gains 1 life. Or each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, then each player loses 1 life. So I included this because it can make you lose the game, even though it doesn't actually say the words, you lose the game. Similarly, there's the Deck of Many Things. This can kind of be a win condition as well as a lose condition for us. 5 mana, legendary artifact out of the D&D set, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Has a few effects. You can pay 2 and roll a d20, then subtract the number of cards in your hand. If the result is 0 or less, you discard your hand. However, if the result is 1 through 9, return a card at random from your graveyard to your hand. If it's 10 through 19, draw 2 cards. Or if it's 20, put a creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. When that creature dies, its owner loses the game. So if we get one of our opponent's creatures and it dies, they will lose the game, because despite us controlling it, they're still the owner of that card. But if we get one of our creatures from our graveyard and it dies, we would lose the game. So those were all of the cards that make us lose the game. But as I mentioned, we want to have effects in the deck also that say we can't lose the game, and there are actually quite a few of those. There are 9 of these cards right here. These are all cards which prevent us from losing the game. So first there's Gideon of the Trials. This one you can 0 to make an emblem that says, as long as you control a Gideon Planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. There is a Lich's Mirror. It's a 4-mana, 5-mana artifact. It says if you would lose the game, instead shuffle your hand, your graveyard, and all permanents you own into your library, then draw 7 cards and your life total becomes 20. There's the Book of Exalted Deeds. We can pay 3 mana and tap it, exile this, put an Enlightened counter on an Angel. It gains you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. There's the Golden Throne, a pretty new card here, once again out of the Warhammer decks. This card is actually quite important, I feel, in this deck, because not only does it allow us to not lose the game, this is a very good ramp piece. So if you would lose the game and said exile this and your life total becomes 1, but we can also tap this, sacrifice a creature, and add 3 mana in any combination of colors. So I like this card a lot. Stunning Reversal out of Battle Bond. An instant, next time you would lose the game, this turn. Instead, draw 7 cards and your life total becomes 1. You exile this. Angel's Grace. This one is one that probably a lot of people are familiar with, seeing as it sees play in Modern sometimes. It has split second, so it can't respond to it. You can't lose the game this turn, your opponents can't win the game this turn. Until end of turn, damage that will reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. Exquisite Archangel, a 7-mana angel, flying. If you would lose the game, Instead, exile Exquisite Archangel and your life total becomes your starting life total. Platinum Angel, quite a popular one as well. Very simple, you can't lose the game, your opponents can't win the game. Then Cloudsteel Kirin of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This is a reconfigure card, so if it's equipped to a creature, the equipped creature has flying, and you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. And these cards are all very important, because as you've seen by now, we have 25 cards here that say we lose the game, or that can make us lose the game, but we want to be able to play these cards without losing. Playing things like Last Chance or Warrior's Oath to take an extra turn for just 2 mana is a very good thing. So if we have one of these cards in play, we can play these cards without actually losing the game. And one thing that people sometimes do to get around the lose the game effects is they'll play cards like Obeka. This is an entire deck kind of built around that theme, is that you just end the turn while the lose the game trigger is on the stack. I initially had this card as well as Sundial of the Infinite in this deck, but I found that because there are so many of these other cards that say we don't lose the game, these cards just felt very redundant. I would have these in my hand and just not need to play them at all because I would have at least one of these effects in play, possibly multiple, and I just never needed to play these, so I ended up cutting Obeka and Sundial from the deck. So with these cards in play, if we have something like Lich's Mastery and it leaves the battlefield, we don't lose because they say we can't lose the game. Or we could just play a Pact for 0 and then not have to pay for it on our next upkeep because we can't lose. But we can also use these to set up the win, because we could have something like, say, 9 lives in play or any of the Lich cards where it says when it leaves the battlefield you lose the game. We can have this in play and feel pretty safe if we have one of these cards, because even if it leaves play, we still won't lose. But we could have one of these in play and then, say, donate it to the opponent with a card like Donate, Harmless Offering, or Zedru the Great-Hearted, and then we could wipe the board, and since their opponent controls that card, when it leaves play, they're going to lose the game. And this is one of the main ways that the deck can win the game, or at least make other people lose the game, is by using these cards to donate the lose the game cards to our opponent so that they will lose instead of us. So I have these 3 effects that can give cards to our opponent. There was a 4th one initially as well. There was Blim, Comedic Genius, that I used to have in the deck, but I cut this because once again it felt quite redundant, and I feel like this is kind of the least reliable way to donate something to our opponent, because it needs to deal combat damage to a player before it's going to trigger. So yes, it has flying, and we could use Kenrith to give it haste and trample, but there's still no guarantee that that's going to connect and trigger. So I cut this from the deck, and I feel like these 3 are enough. And one thing that's very important regarding these cards, with Kenrith being our commander, is that we can use this ability of Kenrith right here, pay 5 mana, 4 in black, put a creature card from the graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So say we have a Platinum Angel or a Cloudsteel Kirin, if we're relying on that to not lose the game and our opponent destroys it, we can get it back with Kenrith and keep going. There's one card here I've included, mostly because I think it's hilarious. It's another one that doesn't say we lose the game, but it's a similar kind of theme. This is Abyssal Persecutor. This is a 4 mana, 6/6 flyer. It also has trample, but it says you can't win the game and your opponents can't lose the game. So you can do some really weird stuff with this card. Actually, one thing you can do is you could donate this to your opponent with one of the effects like Donate or Harmless Offering, and that means that they can't win and you can't lose. However, a very funny interaction with this card is that if you have this in play, as well as an effect like, say, Lich's Mastery or something that says you can't lose, the game just can't end. Because you can't win the game, your opponents can't lose the game, but also you can't lose the game. This interaction actually did come up in a game I played, and it was hilarious. Everyone was laughing, and it was a good time. Obviously, at some point, one of these cards is going to get removed and the game will actually end, but it's still just a funny situation. Next, we've got some ramp, because the deck is quite mana hungry, and it's 5 colors, so we want to make sure that our colors work. We've got some mana rocks here: Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, and Chromatic Lantern. Those are the mana rocks, but we have more ramp as well. We have here a Birds of Paradise, Ignoble Hierarch, Sakura Tribe Elder, Bloom Tender, Dockside Extortionist, Nature's Lure, 3 Visits, Farseek, and Sky Shroud Claim. The reason I've gone with Sky Shroud Claim is because it allows us to get forests so we can get triomes and things like that. Next, we've got a few cards that are kind of generically good or staples, that kind of thing. Heroic Intervention, this one is quite important because, as you see in many of the cards say, we lose the game when they leave the battlefield, so people want to try and remove them from the battlefield. This can give our stuff hexproof and indestructible until end of turn and stop that from happening. Fairies Protection, similar kind of idea. I have a couple of tutors here, Vampiric Tutor as well as Demonic Tutor. We have Anguished Unmaking. This is just removal for basically anything. There isn't a whole lot of removal in the deck, but I did want to include at least a little bit, so this is one that can answer almost anything. We have an Oblivion Stone. This is what I've chosen as my one sweeper kind of effect to have in the deck. I like this one because, once again, with cards that make us lose when they leave play, we don't want those to leave play. So what we could do is use this to put a fate counter on something we don't want to leave play, and then sacrifice it after and keep that permanent in play. We have an Eternal Witness here. This can be very important to get back key cards from the graveyard, but also I have Eternal Witness and Acidic Slime here as kind of just generically good green cards. Eternal Witness can rebuy stuff. Actually, both of these are very good cards to have with Kenrith, because once again we can use this ability to get them back from the graveyard straight onto the battlefield and use their enter the battlefield triggers again. But also we have the green pact. We have the whole cycle of pacts, but Summoner's Pact allows us to get a green card from our deck, a green creature. So these are both green creatures that we could get with Summoner's Pact, because otherwise the only options that we have really are mana dorks, which we probably don't want to get. Also, this is a fairly recent addition to the deck, Aetherflux Reservoir. I found that games with this deck can tend to go quite long, and that does make sense because you're playing things that prevent you from losing the game. So eventually you'll probably end up winning, but you might have to dig through pretty much your whole deck to find what you're looking for to make the game end. But with Aetherflux Reservoir, if you want the game to just end, you can just play Aetherflux, gain some life with Kenrith, and then shoot your opponents with Aetherflux Reservoir and end the game that way. With a deck like this, I don't really want to end the game that way, but it's in here to prevent the game going on for 4 or 5 hours potentially. And then there's this last card here, Door to Nothingness. If I'm playing a 5-color deck, I'm playing Door to Nothingness, okay? But also, this is another one that can kind of just help to close the game out. Once again, it doesn't end the game, it just makes one person lose, but that can be enough sometimes. And then last we've got the lands. There's nothing terribly fancy in here, mostly just mana producing lands, but we have a bunch of fetches here. We have all 10 shock lands. We kind of need these because it is a 5-color deck and we play all 5 of the colors. Sometimes with 5-color decks you might only have like one copy of a certain color card in the deck, but this is, I feel, a true 5-color deck. So we got all 10 shocks. We don't have all of the triomes, but we have a significant number here. We have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the triomes. Some of our rainbow glands that can produce any colored mana. Forbidden Orchard, Exotic Orchard, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Command Tower. The World Tree is quite good. We don't have any gods that we can search up with this ability, but basically getting the Chromatic Lantern type of effect on a land can be quite useful. We have a Plaza of Heroes. This isn't a rainbow land because, say we play Kenrith, this will only tap to add white if we have Kenrith in play, because despite Kenrith having a 5-color identity, it still only counts for white with Plaza. But one thing that's cool with this is that one of our main ways to not lose the game can be Cloudsteel Kieran, which equips to a creature, and then that creature has you can't lose the game, your opponents can't win the game, so people will typically want to remove the creature that it's equipped to. We can put it on Kenrith, and then if we have Plaza of Heroes in play, we can protect Kenrith by exiling this and giving it hexproof and indestructible till end of turn, because it's legendary. So we also have a few of the channel lands here. So Igonjo, Otawara, and Boseiju, we're playing those 3. Reliquary Tower, I feel, is very important in this deck. This is a cool copy. You can see it's signed here. This is one that a viewer gave to me when we met at one of the face-to-face games events, so it's cool that I can play this in the deck. But when we have Lich's Mastery and Kenrith in play, we can draw a ton of cards, and we want to have those cards in our hand, so Reliquary Tower can help us to keep all those cards. And then 3 basic lands. We've seen that one already, but we have 3 basic lands here: Plains, Island, and Forest. So I've been playing this deck, and it's very fun to play. What's cool also is that I feel like it's fun for everyone, because you just do such weird stuff that people don't necessarily see coming, and it kind of changes the way the game is played a little bit. Everyone tends to end up laughing and having a good time when you're playing this deck. I might actually like this one more than the deck that has all of the win conditions in it, and that deck is very fun to play as well. But typically how I've seen this deck play out is that you get to a point where you have something that says you can't lose the game and play, like Lich's Mastery or Platinum Angel. Then you start using Kenrith to really dig through your deck and start chaining together cards like these that allow you to take extra turns. You can potentially chain enough of these together to draw your whole deck, and then once you have access to anything, you would play something like Forbidden Crypt, Archfiend of the Dross, or Demonic Pact, and then use a card like Donate to donate that to your opponent so that they get the lose the game trigger and they lose. And you can make the lose the game trigger happen faster by using Kenrith's abilities, because say they have Forbidden Crypt in play, whenever they draw a card, instead they put a card from their graveyard into their hand. If they can't, they lose the game. So if they control this, you can just use Kenrith's ability to keep making them draw cards until they have none left. Or say you have a Transcendence and you give that to them. It says when you have 20 or more life, you lose the game. Once again, you can use Kenrith to just make them gain life so that they'll be above 20 and lose the game. But I'm super happy with this deck so far. I'd definitely be interested to hear your thoughts on it. I feel like there's a lot of cards that could go in this deck. There's some very similarly themed ones that can... something like, say, Phyrexian on Life, which it doesn't say you can't lose the game, but it's you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. Cards like that they're on a similar theme, but I don't have a lot of those kind of effects in here because I want ones that actually say you can't lose the game so that it can get around the triggers from these that make you lose the game, because these don't care about whether you have 0 or less life or not. But things like that, they could potentially find their way into the deck, I think. So if you have any suggestions, leave those in the comments below. I'd be happy to read the suggestions or any comments that you have or ideas for the deck. If you've played anything similar to this, definitely let me know and I'd be happy to read your experiences. But otherwise though, if you're still watching, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I'd encourage everyone to come join my Discord server. You can find a link to that in the video description below. And in the video description, you can also find my affiliate links for Dragon Shield. In case you'd like to purchase any gaming supplies, you can follow those affiliate links and help out the channel while you do so. And also, I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the patrons who support me on Patreon. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.